When grieving grandparents kidnap a pregnant woman to resurrect their dead grandson with a satanic spell, they unwittingly open a demonic doorway that unleashes hell on their town. Can the survivors defeat the evil and stop the devastation? Find out in this chilling horror story. Are you ready? Let's go!
Thomas and Mary had always been doting grandparents to their grandson, Joshua. They had spoiled him with love and attention, taking him on trips and buying him all the toys he could ever want. Joshua had been the light of their lives, the source of their joy and happiness. But that all changed when Joshua fell ill. He was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia, and despite the best efforts of his doctors, he passed away at the age of 7. Thomas and Mary were devastated. They had lost not only their beloved grandson but also a part of themselves. They couldn't bear the thought of never seeing Joshua again, never holding him in their arms or hearing his laughter. They were consumed by grief and despair. In their desperation, Thomas and Mary turned to the occult. They had heard rumors of a powerful spell that could bring the dead back to life, a satanic ritual that required a sacrifice of great purity and innocence. They knew it was a dangerous path, but they were willing to do anything to have Joshua back with them. They searched for months, looking for the perfect candidate for their plan. And then they found her, a young pregnant woman, alone and vulnerable. They lured her into their home, promising her food and shelter. But in reality, she was their sacrifice. Thomas and Mary performed the ritual, chanting the ancient words and spilling the young woman's blood on the altar. They believed they had succeeded, that Joshua had been brought back from the dead and was once again with them. But something was different about Joshua. He was no longer the sweet, innocent boy they remembered. He was cold and calculating, with a darkness in his eyes that sent shivers down their spines. And he was hungry for something more than just their love and attention. Thomas and Mary soon realized that they had made a terrible mistake. They had opened a demonic doorway, and they had no idea how to close it. They were trapped, with a resurrected grandson who was no longer human and a powerful force of evil that threatened to consume them all. As they watched in horror, Joshua began to take over their home, using his newfound powers to manipulate and control them. They were no longer the ones in charge, they were his servants, his pawns in a game of life and death. Thomas and Mary were filled with regret, knowing that their love for their grandson had led them down a path of darkness and despair. They had lost everything, including their own souls, in their quest to bring Joshua back to life. And now, they were paying the ultimate price. It was a cold, dark night when Jennifer found herself lost and alone on a desolate road. She had been driving for hours, trying to make her way back home, but her car had broken down, leaving her stranded. Her phone had no signal, and she had no choice but to walk, hoping to find help. As she stumbled along, shivering in the icy wind, Jennifer saw a light in the distance. It was coming from a small farmhouse, and she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe someone there could help her. She made her way to the house, knocking on the door. An elderly couple, Thomas and Mary, answered, and they seemed friendly enough. They invited her in, offering her food and a warm bed for the night. Jennifer was grateful, relieved to have found a safe haven in the middle of nowhere. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the couple. There was a strange energy in the house, a sense of foreboding that made her uneasy. As the night wore on, Jennifer began to feel even more uncomfortable. She heard strange noises coming from upstairs, whispers and murmurs that sounded like a language she couldn't understand. And then she saw a glimpse of something dark and shadowy moving in the corner of her eye. Jennifer knew then that she needed to leave, to get as far away from that house as possible. But before she could make her escape, she was attacked from behind, a sharp blow to the head that sent her spiraling into darkness. When Jennifer awoke, she found herself bound and gagged, lying on the cold concrete floor of a cellar. Her stomach turned as she realized the truth. She had been kidnapped, and these people were not who they seemed. As Jennifer struggled to free herself, she heard the sound of chanting coming from upstairs. It was a language she didn't recognize, a sinister voice that seemed to be calling forth some kind of evil presence. Jennifer's fear turned to terror as she realized what was happening. These people weren't just kidnappers, they were cultists, and they were about to perform a dark ritual, with her as the sacrifice. She tried to scream, to fight against her restraints, but it was no use. She was trapped, with no way out. And then, just as she thought it couldn't get any worse, she felt a sharp pain in her stomach. Jennifer screamed in agony as she realized what was happening. The cultists were cutting her open, taking her unborn child as the final sacrifice for their ritual. As she lay there, dying, Jennifer could feel the darkness closing in around her. She had stumbled into a nightmare, a world of horror and madness that she never could have imagined. And now, she was paying the ultimate price for her unwitting involvement in a demonic plot. Thomas and Mary had always been a loving couple, devoted to each other and their only son, David. But when David died suddenly in a car accident, their world was shattered. They couldn't bear the thought of living without him, and their grief consumed them. In their desperation, they turned to the only thing they believed could help them: black magic. They scoured the internet for spells and incantations, trying to find a way to bring their beloved grandson back from the dead. But their efforts were in vain, and they soon realized that they needed something more. They needed a human sacrifice, a pregnant woman whose unborn child could act as a vessel for David's soul. The couple knew it was wrong, but their grief had twisted their minds, and they were willing to do anything to bring their grandson back. They carefully planned their kidnapping, waiting for the right victim to cross their path. As they performed the ritual, Thomas and Mary could feel the power coursing through their bodies. It was like nothing they had ever experienced before, a rush of dark energy that consumed them. But as the ritual came to a close, something went horribly wrong. The demonic forces they had summoned were too powerful for them to control, and a portal to hell opened up in the center of the room. Thomas and Mary were horrified as they realized their mistake. They had unleashed a demonic entity that was now free to wreak havoc on the world. They tried to close the portal, but it was too late. The demon had already entered our world. As the days passed, the couple descended further into madness. They were haunted by visions of their dead grandson, and the demon that they had summoned was always lurking in the shadows, watching them. They tried to reverse the spell, to banish the demon back to hell, but it was too powerful. They were trapped, living in a nightmare of their own making. In the end, they were consumed by the darkness that they had unleashed. Thomas and Mary became vessels for the demon, their bodies and minds taken over by its malevolent presence. As they lurked in the shadows, they continued to search for a way to bring their grandson back to life, even as they terrorized the town with their demonic powers. Their once loving hearts had been consumed by the darkness, and there was no turning back. The portal to hell had been opened, and nothing would ever be the same again. As the demonic entity unleashed by Thomas and Mary's ritual spread its influence, the town was plunged into chaos. Strange occurrences began to happen, and the people who lived there felt a sense of unease and dread. At first, it was just little things, objects moving on their own, strange noises in the night, and unexplained power outages. But as time went on, things escalated. People began to see apparitions of loved ones who had passed on, and they reported feeling like they were being watched all the time. The town was plagued by a wave of accidents and deaths, with no clear cause. Cars would suddenly swerve off the road, or machinery would malfunction, causing fatal accidents. As the days passed, more and more people fell victim to the demonic entity's influence. Some went mad, seeing visions of hellish creatures everywhere they turned. Others were consumed by a sense of hopelessness, their will to live drained away. Despite the growing danger, many of the town's residents were in denial about the true nature of the threat they faced. They tried to explain away the strange occurrences as coincidence or bad luck, refusing to accept that something truly evil had been unleashed upon their town. But for those who knew the truth, there was no escape from the terror that gripped the town. They knew that they were dealing with forces beyond their understanding, and that the only hope for survival was to band together and fight back. A small group of survivors, including a police officer named Mark and a local pastor named Father Michael, began to investigate the strange occurrences. They soon discovered the truth behind the town's descent into darkness, and the horrifying consequences of Thomas and Mary's actions. Despite the risks, the group resolved to stop the demonic entity and close the portal to hell. They knew that the only way to do so was to confront the source of the evil, Thomas and Mary. The group tracked down the farmhouse where the couple had been living, but when they arrived, they found the place deserted. It was as though the couple had vanished into thin air. As they searched the house, they discovered a hidden room filled with dark objects and ritualistic symbols. It was clear that Thomas and Mary had been performing black magic for years, and that they had been consumed by their grief and madness. But as they were about to leave, they heard a voice in the darkness. It was Thomas, his body now taken over by the demonic entity. He warned them to leave, to abandon their quest to close the portal. Despite the danger, the group refused to back down. They knew that the only way to save their town was to face the demon head-on, no matter what the cost. And so they prepared for the final showdown, a battle between the forces of light and darkness, with the fate of the town hanging in the balance. The small group of survivors knew that they were up against a powerful and malevolent force. The demonic entity that had been unleashed by Thomas and Mary's ritual had already claimed the lives of many in the town and had caused chaos and destruction. The group of survivors had one mission: to confront the source of the evil and close the portal to hell. They knew that the task was daunting, but they were determined to fight for their town and their lives. The group was led by Father Michael, who had seen and dealt with demonic entities in the past. He had a plan, but it was risky. They would need to lure the demon to the town square, where they would perform a ritual to close the portal. As they made their way to the town square, they could feel the demon's presence growing stronger. The streets were empty, and the air was thick with an oppressive energy. They knew that the final battle was at hand. Once they reached the town square, Father Michael began to recite an ancient incantation to close the portal. As he spoke the words, the demon appeared, looming over them, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The demon was massive, with skin that looked like charred wood and eyes that burned with hellfire. It was clear that they were facing an ancient and powerful entity, one that had been waiting for centuries to break free from its prison. The group stood their ground, ready to fight to the death. They knew that they were outmatched, but they were determined to give it their all. As the demon approached them, they could feel their hearts pounding in their chests. Father Michael continued to recite the incantation, but the demon was not going down without a fight. It summoned dark energy, and a wave of black mist filled the square. The survivors fought hard, but it was clear that the demon was too powerful. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the pregnant woman, the one who Thomas and Mary had kidnapped in their quest to resurrect their dead grandson. She had managed to escape, and now she had a plan. The woman approached the demon, and to everyone's surprise, she began to recite the same incantation as Father Michael. Her voice was strong and clear, and she seemed to have an almost supernatural power. The demon was caught off guard, and the group used the opportunity to attack. They fought with all their might, their weapons clashing against the demon's skin. In a final, desperate move, the demon summoned all its power and unleashed a massive wave of energy. The survivors were thrown back, their bodies battered and bruised. As they struggled to get back on their feet, they could see that the demon was weakening. The woman's incantation had done the trick, and the portal to hell was closing. With one final push, the group managed to drive the demon back, sealing the portal and banishing the entity back to the depths of hell. The survivors were left standing in the town square, battered and bruised, but victorious. The town was saved, and the evil that had plagued it was vanquished. As they looked around at the devastation, the survivors knew that they had been lucky to make it out alive. They vowed to never forget the horrors they had faced and to always be ready to fight against the forces of darkness. For them, the nightmare was over, but the scars would last a lifetime. They knew that they had been forever changed by their encounter with the demonic entity, and that they would never be the same again. The survivors were left with a sense of disbelief as they looked around the town. The once peaceful and quiet community had been turned into a wasteland of destruction and chaos. Buildings were burned to the ground, and the streets were littered with debris. They knew that it would take years to rebuild and heal from the trauma that they had endured. Many had lost loved ones, and the scars of their injuries would take time to heal. But they were grateful to be alive and to have stopped the demon from wreaking further havoc. The first order of business was to tend to the wounded and to give the dead a proper burial. It was a somber time as the town mourned its losses. The pregnant woman, who had played a crucial role in defeating the demon, was among the casualties. The survivors held a service in her honor and remembered her bravery and sacrifice. The survivors then turned their attention to Thomas and Mary, the grieving grandparents who had unwittingly opened the portal to hell. They had disappeared after the final battle, and the town was in a state of panic, unsure of what they might do next. After a few days, the police received a tip from a nearby town that Thomas and Mary had been spotted. They had been wandering aimlessly, lost in their grief and guilt over what they had done. The survivors were torn between anger and pity for the couple. They had caused so much destruction and death, but they had also lost their grandson and were clearly not in their right minds. Thomas and Mary were taken into custody and were charged with kidnapping and attempted murder. They were placed in a psychiatric facility, where they would receive the help they needed to cope with their loss and to understand the severity of their actions. The survivors began the arduous process of rebuilding their town, taking comfort in each other's company and in the knowledge that they had defeated the evil that had threatened to consume them all. As time passed, the town slowly began to heal. Buildings were rebuilt, and people began to go about their daily lives once again. But there was a sense of caution and fear that lingered in the air. The survivors knew that they had been lucky to make it out alive, and they were determined to never forget the horrors they had faced. They made a pact to always be vigilant and to never let their guard down. They knew that evil could come from unexpected places and that they needed to be prepared to fight against it. The survivors also took comfort in the fact that they had come together during the crisis. They had put aside their differences and had worked as a team to defeat the demon. They knew that they had formed a bond that would last a lifetime. As they looked back on the nightmare that they had endured, they knew that they had emerged stronger and more resilient. They had faced the worst that the world could throw at them, and they had come out on top. The survivors knew that they would never forget the horrors they had faced, but they were determined to move forward, to rebuild their town, and to live their lives to the fullest. They had been through hell and back, and they were ready for whatever the future held.